Wrong camera, this one. Hey guys, Akiba here from CryptoSlate for the next episode of SlateCast. Today we're talking to Matt Sorg from the Solana Foundation, so stay tuned. Okay, let's bring Matt in. Matt, how you doing?
Great, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Solana, how did you, I've seen your CV, you started off at Riot, I think you were at Unity for a while. How did you, what attracted you to the Web3 space?
So after Riot, well, actually left Riot to form essentially what was a blockchain Steam at the time, selling games. We were trying to basically use the blockchain, Ethereum mainnet to certify your purchase across multiple platforms. So Steam, itch.io, whatever, anything that was available. We had our own launch pad, and so that you buy it once, you can kind of use it anywhere. So we actually had the first soulbound tokens, because the way that we did it with some of the platforms was just use the Steam key, but like once you expose the Steam key, you couldn't reuse it. So that part of it wasn't tradable, but they still had like an NFT. It was actually some of the first 1155 ERC 1155 contracts, where some of the NFTs were non-tradable, soulbound, and some of them were tradable as like kind of collectibles within the game, and you could trade those in the secondary. So so that's how I got into it. Now, the thesis basically was if Riot was having trouble monetizing and connecting people across a ton of different platforms, then or in regions and things like that, then a lot of people are probably having this problem. Then we kind of ran up against Ethereum's mainnet isn't really a consumer app friendly chain. It's 17 transactions per second. So when we had successful mints and things, it just wasn't economical for our users. But especially back then, they were paying $20 for our service, So having a dollar or whatever.
Yeah, it's down to like 2 Gwei at the moment as a base fee, which is just insane.
But then I about 2.5 years ago now, met Raj and Toli through some connections. I'm a 2-time startup founder, so that was the first one, and so we just kind of got connected about what it would mean to execute a consumer app strategy. What does it mean to build an ecosystem around blockchain integrations? And so that's and just analyzing Solana versus a lot all the other options that are doing L2s and other L1s. I just Solana's ready for consumer apps as it's shown.
So I mean, on that, it's one of the questions I wanted to ask then. So obviously you've got a background in development and tech. I've seen you on your LinkedIn profile. You've got a lot of experience in different languages. What attracted you to Solana over other blockchains, other than some of the things you just mentioned there?
It's just differentiated technology. I know there's a lot of noise in the space around how things are going to scale or what things are set up for the future, and there's a lot of things that are necessary for the ecosystems to form and things like that. But Solana is ready today and has a very clear path to scaling pretty arbitrarily in the future in a very user-friendly way. Solana's never had a block reorg of an optimistically confirmed block. So basically what that means from a user perspective is I click a button, very quickly I get my response for 400 millisecond block time. It means that most transactions confirm in under 3 seconds. So it's like very much like a Web 2 experience, but you're still getting all the decentralization of 2,000 validator nodes, very distributed stake. And so you get that good very mindful, good trade-offs in terms of decentralization, and which decentralization draws in influential apps. Like if I want to build my app, I want to build it in a place where I know that people aren't going to, the chain isn't going to censor me or anything like that. So even if the average user doesn't necessarily care about the decentralization, I think the app builders and the businesses do care. And so it has that, but it also has the performance characteristics that are really necessary for a good user experience, and that exists today.
Is that something you feel is an issue over on mainnet at the moment? I remember reading over the weekend that I think over 51% of validators are now using kind of Flashbots or some other MEV system, which is compliant with OFAC sanctions. So Ethereum isn't quite censoring at a protocol level, but almost.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, this gets in a whole litany of things. One, just Ethereum having, in the whole Ethereum ecosystem having a mempool and longer block times. It's just way easier to do different types of MEV and then the negative types of MEV. Some types of MEV are good, like just different arbitrage things do things smooth out prices, and that can be really good MEV. But the negative, like sandwich tax and other types of MEV of just front running, well-meaning transactions that can be really toxic. So Solana having very, very tight windows and very fast confirmation confidence. It's really hard to execute a MEV strategy, which is actually part of the reason why we think, as an immature market, most of the MEV and most of the capital is moving over towards the less performant chains because they can extract more value. But I think over time that will, as the ecosystem matures, that will be better and better for Solana. And just because it's like you want your economies and your actual finance to be taking place on a platform that isn't taking what's called like economic rent. It isn't taking purely extracting from the ecosystem. And so yeah, you see that a lot on Ethereum mainnet today. But even the L2s and other L1s, like it's and Solana too, to be clear, like and that's like something that we constantly are working to minimize censorship, be as censorship resistant as possible, and what can we do to facilitate technologies and things there. But as of today, it's hard to argue that Solana isn't best in class.
Yeah. So I mean, with that, it obviously sounds very, very bullish on Solana and the technology. One of the things I wanted to ask what do you think of there being so many other blockchains, and do you think a multi-chain future is a necessity or just inevitable?
I think it's pretty. I mean, whatever way you want to look at it, I think having different configurations and things to meet your needs. Even in a sense, like some blockchains are just kind of storage chains, but it's still blockchain. They still get submitted, but they're optimized for, total state storage. Other ones like Solana are going to be optimized for being the settlement layer of financial transactions and other things that, maybe at game economies and other utilities. So, you'll still have some differentiation, just as similarly like that you have with MongoDB is different than SQL. Insert SQL on a joke here, but like you're gonna have different technologies that are kind of optimized for different use cases, and you'll certainly see that. And you have some that are just more isolated environments, and they don't necessarily care about the performance as well. But like even like Ethereum mainnet, like there's a lot being made about like Solana being Ethereum killer or whatever. We actually think that Solana, Ethereum having a mempool and being a more mature technology, it makes sense as being the settlement layer of L2s. There's no, I don't have any misgivings saying that. It's optimizing for that purpose, and then they think that very, very mindfully of that with every update. Solana is updating more, rapidly and having performance and consumer apps in mind. It's like, so it's different use case specific that you're seeing already, even if the whole industry is, not as mature. And so I think there will be some consolidation where different chains and different protocols will take some of the learnings from other protocols. Like Solana will become more and more configurable over time. You're already seeing that with, Neon Labs is making EVM compatible on Solana, and Move is coming out probably early next year. Move language. So you'll see different chains kind of figuring out what still works and just like analyzing the trade-offs of the protocol.
Do you think we'll still also get chains that maybe aren't as advanced sticking around due to kind of network effect, just like we see it in sort of Web2 development? Sort of people still run like WordPress on PHP 5 because it works for them. They don't know anything else.
Yeah, things will just kind of like sneakily still exist. Like I don't know, there's the whole thing where apparently some of our health systems were on Cobalt or something like that. So when like COVID hit,
I think a lot of the banking
they weren't
systems are still on
engineers.
that,
Yeah, there's just there's like random legacy things. Of course, yeah, the network effects are very sticky, and that's why it's really interesting when people talk about like Ethereum killers or Solana killers or anything like that. I mean, it's a little bit short-sighted. It's hard to make it. It's hard to get that 0 to 1 of an ecosystem. So once you kind of have it like Ethereum mainnet and Solana, it's not really going to go away anytime soon. And if any of the other L1s and 2s ever get to similar volumes as Solana or Ethereum, the performance characteristics will still make it so they'll probably hang around in some form for a while if they satisfy that niche.
What do you think? I'm not asking for the actual solution, because if you knew it, you'd be a billionaire. But what do you think needs to happen for us to get towards a solution in terms of bridging for multi-chains? Because obviously it almost seems that every time there's a massive issue which puts the mainstream looking down on crypto, it's because of some form of bridge. Obviously the Binance one, the most recent one.
Yep. Yeah, that is a very good question. That's actually part of the reason why when people going multi-chain, especially as like a singular experience, does have, I mean, it's just integration and just fragmentation. It is a problem. So to solve it, we're taking an approach that we think is a little bit better. There's just kind of assurances of shared validator sets and things like that that you can do when there's shared incentives across different chains. But I mean,
Cosmos even looking at that as well. I remember Sonny at Cosmoverse was talking about mesh security and using
exactly. Yeah, but the core of this is that this is a hard problem in Web 2. Even if I have like a single Web 2 database, whatever version of it is, just creating replicas and syncing across those replicas, and like there's different types of consistency that they each use, and not all of them mean that there's atomic consistency across all of the different state replicas. And in cryptocurrency, where there's attack vectors based on that can be a really huge problem. And so you kind of have to constrain yourself to a specific kind, and that restraint makes it so it's you have to be fault tolerant to a lot of different attack vectors. But it's also like such a new space that honestly, like the Ronin one is just very much like man in the middle, like between desk and chair kind of a thing where they just didn't secure their keys of the bridge as well. And like you'll just see, like, I think part of it. So there's one end of the spectrum that this is just tens of thousands of startups, and some of them are just going to mess up because they're startups and they're not mature. But then there's the other side of it where it is just a hard problem. How do you have a completely different network that you can rely on to sync between two disparate chains that all in those even in the individual chains, they're having to try to figure out agreements and consensus on different things. So you have to like really worry about like block reorgs or disagreements on active state. And so there's it's a security issue for sure, but also just a user experience. And I think that's one of the main areas that, especially during this bear, that people are really thinking about maturing.
It makes a lot of sense. And for me also, it's the fact of that you talk about the difference between like Web 2 being an internet of information versus internet of value on Web 3. When, I don't know, Adobe gets hacked again and it leaks all of the email addresses, the economical impact of that isn't seen directly. It may take months or years to see how many people are hacked by it. Whereas in Web 3, well, it's right away. And that is the impact. And it doesn't grow from there. But I mean, you go on, what is it, like haveibeenpwned.com, and you can find your email address is probably on the dark web with all your data.
This is a fascinating concept because it's almost the reverse in crypto, where the financial impact is felt right away, and then it's constrained over time as the people say, okay, highlight these addresses on the explorers, and eventually there's so many constraints on it that they usually give some sort of back. And then they consider some sort of bounty reward essentially. Whereas you're right, exactly. In Web 2, it happens reverse, where it's like this slow burn if you don't know, like is everybody changing back their passwords or whatever credentials. It's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, I thought so. So now that I've made you laugh, I'm going to make you cry. So Solana being down has become a meme at this point.
Yes.
Why does it happen more than on other current blockchains, or does it at least appear to?
So there's a few multifaceted set of answers. One, we are not marketers, so we have done ourselves a disservice in calling certain things outages, which other chains would call congestion. And so there were several downtimes that that Solana was still doing more transactions in even during the congestion period than all of the public blockchains combined. It was still transacting, several hundred transactions per second. It was just by Solana standards, and this is from apps, not votes. Like from by Solana standards, it was a good degraded experience for most users, and so yeah. So there's partly because in terms of network halts, there have been 3 in the last year, totaling around 18 hours, and there's a lot of other proof of stake chains that have also had similar, at least some types of downtime. So part of it is a communication that network halts in a proof of stake network. It's just going to happen in a consensus bug. It's quite, and the other kind of misnomer about this is that oftentimes it is because of decentralization that the network would halt. It's because like literally the disparate systems can't agree on what the next state, what the next block should be, and so they halt because they can't propagate blocks. And that's very different. Like there's this narrative that we're losing, that somehow some entity is choosing to turn it off, which is just not the case. It's complete opposite. If there was one entity, they would just keep going. They would have no problems coming to consensus with themselves. And so that's like a thing that the concept that we've certainly lost, as if like we have any say in that matter.
Oh yeah, you definitely hear it all the time. Whenever Solana goes down, it's like, oh, the Solana Foundation have turned it off again.
Yeah, but we didn't like what in the same way they think that somehow we turn it back on, even though the communication is just happening in a public Discord where people, all the validators are just talking to each other about the restart logic and proliferating the information of the slots, and they have like 20 different download links from different validators of the actors, the up-to-date ledger in case somebody missed the most recent slot and things like that. And don't get me wrong, this is a new process. It could be more automated and other things like that. But in order to restart, you have to reach 80% of stake weight, and so that is the vote. It's not like there's something that somebody's turning on. In fact, the most recent one just kind of happened at a time where Europe was asleep. So it took, the reason why it took, I don't know, 7 hours, whatever the total downtime was, because 4 hours was like waiting for 80% for people, because it's a distributed system. So there's two types, like there's a couple different types of like fault tolerance. So the fault tolerance that is very secure on Solana is the security of the active state, because there's 2,000 replicas of people who have the active state. And if, as long as you have it, you can prove that you have it. And so if somebody has an up-to-date ledger, more up-to-date ledger than somebody else, they can prove it. So that kind of fault tolerance is very, very secure on Solana. The type of fault tolerance that isn't as secure is, Solana is a completely new system. So there's frankly just a few bugs that have been around, like the consensus layer, or, when you're doing the financial transactions, this type of security that you can't have faulty transactions, or you don't want there to be the ledger being malformed in some way from confirmed transactions, so that it has a very, very strict requirement for what the next block should be. And if it ever gets out of that in any way, the network can't reach consensus. And so it is quite literally like a liveliness versus security issue in a very new chain that was built from the ground up. There's no Geth fork here. It is a completely new network, and that's kind of what you're seeing. So there's other types of immaturity that you see in other chains early on in their histories, either through the way their smart contract logic works, or other chains are seeing certain other types of instability. So Solana optimizes for the stability of, again, there's not been an observed rollback in the history of the chain of a confirmed block. So like that kind of stability is really good, and the performance characteristics of doing more transactions per second than the rest of the blockchains combined. And so I think that's part of the reason why, and everything being new. So like there's just trade-offs there, and there's understandable criticisms because it is too much downtime. I think that's at the end of the day, that's the reality. Even though you have these kind of liveliness versus security trade-offs, it's our job to make it as secure and as stable as possible. And that's part of the reason why on Foundation we have facilitated a second validator client that you can use as a fallback in case there is some sort of consensus bug on one. You could have fallback logic to the second validator client, which will be by a completely independent group that isn't Solana Labs, even written into a different language from the ground up. So it's not even just a fork; it's a completely different protocol. So the odds of there being same interface, same exact specification, just built from the ground up separately. So the odds of there being a bug or some sort of logic that is malformed in each of them is just highly unlikely. And so that's that's going to be very unique on Solana. So these are kinds of things that we are producing to mature this.
Because I mean, you say that the downtime's too much, but I mean, by like Web 2 standards, I think the benchmark's usually at 99.9%, and like, okay, let's take January out of the equation. You're probably well within that, I would say, for the rest of the year still.
Yeah, over the last year and a half, I think it's around there.
Yeah. Do you feel that, along from maybe some internal bad marketing in terms of how you describe them, do you think it's also due to the popularity of Web3 and blockchain over the last few years and the fact that you're building this new technology in a much more public space than, say, Ethereum did when it launched?
Yeah, I think that there's more. One of the frustrating things from my end has always been in academia, you would have new ideas and people would be interested in learning from the new ideas. When everything is so financial, like so there's an existing bags of Ethereum people, then it becomes a slightly different conversation, which can be, like you're indicating, like pretty toxic pretty quickly. Even though that we don't want to, in fact, I don't wish anybody financial ruin or anything. I think we coexist with Ethereum just fine. I don't want their price to go down just because Solana's onto something that is pretty interesting for consumer apps. But I do think it comes off that way in the crypto communication spheres across Twitter and other things, unfortunately.
So one of the things that you've said previously is that you spend most of your times in games. Do you think Solana is the best suited blockchain for gaming?
I think it's the best suited for a lot of gamers have very high performance requirements of their apps. Like the bounce rates go crazy. Like there are entire teams at a lot of these studios that are just there to optimize the initial load times of the games. And so games are still some of the highest performance engineering that you have in any application, and which is why it's so hard to make a game, because you not only have to make this Hollywood style entertainment experience, you also have to produce some of the most high performing software. So I think that's why just the pure performance of Solana kind of separates it from these other chains that don't have as fast of confirmation times or confirmation confidence, or maybe subject to reorg or there's other types of instability. I think it's universally the best. I think there might be some configurations. Maybe I have a defined strategy and I want to have a configurable side chain that is isolated from something else, and I don't want people to submit other code. Then sure, maybe I can see that. And you're already starting to see that where some studios prefer basically just like a Steam ++, where maybe there's a little bit more liquidity, but you're essentially doing just a marketplace, and you're not having like other types of flexible smart contracts aren't possible. All the way to the Solana world, where it's an entire ecosystem where you're connected to other apps, you're connected to other DeFi and all these other things. So there's this. That's why I'm here, because I find that the world that's exciting. But I can understand how somebody else might want a more constrained world for their experience.
So just stick on gaming for a second. Why do you think blockchains are needed for gaming? What does it bring to the table that Web 2 tech can't solve?
I would say needed is always hard with technology. We were talking about Turing complete languages and stuff. It's not necessarily need. I think the things that Web3 does really, really well is transparently incentivizing value creation. So like UGC is kind of the extreme version of that. But you don't even necessarily have to go all the way to like Lua scripts and Roblox and stuff in order to get incentivizing value creation. It could just be, community managers in Discord server that now have, some kind of shared financial incentive to do awesome things for their game. And and the more and more, and then people talk a lot about like interoperability, which does have transparent incentives around, you operate with an asset in my game that just kind of lifts all boats, and that just increases value to my ecosystem. That's great now, as opposed to like a pure like a modding experience. And the Web 2 world, like, it doesn't necessarily translate back as clearly to value that me as the original game creators is taking. So that transfer can be way clearer in Web 3.
Yeah, I mean, you just brought like the prime example for that, I guess, is Arma 3 and PUBG, because
exactly.
PUBG was a mod for Arma 3. He went off and made his own studio because there was no financial incentive for him winning Arma 3. So he made the wrong game.
Exactly. So you can have a much more transparent around that. But then the thing that's even happening like more and more today is just the fact that you have all these standards. People are building stuff on top of those standards, which add value to your ecosystem. So I don't think that DeFi reskinned is really that much of a value prop that's consumer friendly. But if you have a really, really, really good game, adding on some of the interesting things that are happening in DeFi are potentially just adding to that experience. Like the moment I can have like on a patch note, be like, I think this character is going to be nerfed, and I can do some sort of option call on that. Like that's going to be kind of silly and fun. Like who knows? Like, and that's just like one stupid example. But like the main point here is that like communities around games make functionality kicking and screaming. Like they drag the developers through this stuff. Whatever they expose, whatever, they'll find some janky way. Like Dota 2 Auto Chess. They made their own matchmaking system on top of the original one where they would jump into custom games and had no connectivity whatsoever. Like if they just had a little bit more of that public data on a public blockchain, they would have been able to make that service certifiable, where it's actually the matchmaking service of the game itself. And if they're technologically capable of making that service, spinning that side service up, like they're clearly capable of putting it on the block, like interfacing directly on the blockchain. So that's where I think we're going. And that's actually less and less purely financial marketplace based, which is why I'm not as bullish on those kind of plays. And I'm really excited about the Solana type play, where you do have these ecosystems forming where people are creating these things. But the thing is, that world doesn't look as clear if you're before it happens. Like, and I don't think there's any reason to be critical of people who, like consumers who aren't adapting to that world just yet, or like seeing into the future or whatever. Consumers are going to buy the things they want to buy because they're excited about like using the thing. They're not excited about some like future thing that may or may not exist. Therefore, I'm going to buy this token or this NFT right now. I think that the industry, some part of the industry having that expectation is a bit silly. I think we need to make the killer use cases, and we should be concentrating on that.
Yeah, I agree. I also feel that in terms of the adoption element, the language in Web3 is still absolutely garbage, and it's just not right for adoption. And I think for me, it's a matter of when we stop talking about blockchain and just talk about products is probably when we'll actually start seeing the adoption, because all the languages that you can write in, whenever you're promoting any of the programs that you've developed, you're not talking about that tech to the end user. That's just behind the scenes. With Web3, we're talking about the smart contracts or the whatever NFT element. I mean, that's a terrible word as well. Like, I think my view is you've got to Google the USP to find out what it means. Then it's what the hell are you doing?
Totally. It's because in the bear, all the product people left. There's only engineers left who are super into the tech. And then they just kept on calling it NFTs because that's what it is under the hood, and like that. Yeah, it's definitely been it's weird maturation of the space.
But I think, I mean, like the Reddit NFTs have done really well, and they've not used the word NFT anywhere in it. They're all digital collectibles, and that is a much better word for it. And I don't know why we can't just move towards things like that. So yeah, marketing in Web3, we definitely need better marketers. My background is actually in marketing. I hated it though. I've moved into journalism because I just hate selling things. So yeah, we need some other marketers to come in and do a better job. So what does the future of Solana look like to you over the kind of the next 12, 18 months? What can we expect? What are you excited about?
Yeah, Solana's solving from the outside looking in. I think it's hard to realize how much innovation is happening on Solana itself. So the protocol is not nearly as scaled, or that's part of the maturation of it. Like today, the Solana protocol is way more stable than what you kind of indicated in especially like January of this year. So there's just like that maturation of the protocol itself and the scale. Like there's a very incrementally defined path to basically arbitrary scale, hundreds of thousands, millions of transactions per second. So you'll see that over the next 12 to 18 months as demand increases. Also more configuration options coming on in terms of things. You're already seeing that actually. This isn't an announcement. There's already Solana virtual machine L2s coming onto Solana itself. So that you'll have some configuration options there. And then there's just the whole ecosystem that builds on top of that, highly performant. So there's something called XNFTs, which is executable NFTs. So you can actually have executable code that there's different configuration options of it, but you can actually launch an app where I own the app, which is the NFT representation of that app. Or it's just I own arbitrary code that said, like, maybe it triggers an API, or maybe it is a JavaScript that triggers some other on-chain transaction through the Web3 interface. So there's that design space is incredibly interesting. And then there's a bunch of other things. They're kind of like, that's just like a starter of all of the interesting, like, different primitives and different use cases that are starting to stack on top of each other on Solana.
Fascinating. That sounds really interesting. We'll have to talk about that again in future, perhaps. Well, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. It sounds really fascinating, and I'm glad we've been able to speak to someone from the Solana Foundation about the downtime, because I say with crypto Twitter and sort of the meme culture, that the way that the network is growing, I thought it was important to get sort of the inside perspective so that we can kind of put down some of those rumors. And it's really interesting that you were transparent enough to say it's kind of a marketing issue on our own fault for saying that it's downtime when it's kind of maybe not really.
Yeah, I mean, it's both a marketing thing and just a true thing. Like, I don't think there's any reason not to confront that there has been instability and maturation. Like the network is constantly improving. And I think so thank you for having me on the show, because I mean, it just takes a realistic confirmation, a recognition that there was improvement to be had in the network. Today, there's still improvement to be had in the network, and that's kind of what we're committed to facilitating here. And so we just love to, like, thanks for having me on to talk about it and be transparent with other communities that we're trying to be collaborative with, Ethereum and other L1s. We're trying to be a part of a ecosystem that's sharing data and sharing ideas, against the data harvesting Web 2. Like, that seems we're trying to make it so, like, hey, let's work together here about like a lot of these cross-chain problems and all these these things, and we would love to be more interface more and more in positive ways with those communities.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing that. Just stick around in the backstage area for a second. But for this episode of SlateCast, everyone, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.